the new survival of the fittest is not physical. It's intellect. And when I say intellect, I don't mean formally educated. And I'm not saying formerly like previously. I'm saying formally, like institutional. And I always have to make that clarification because I once said that in a video and somebody thought that I was saying formerly, like before. Anyway, I don't mean education in the sense of you pay to learn something or you go to a school or you get a degree. That's not what I'm referring to when I say intellect. In fact, I'm never referring to that when I say intellect because I also understand, and I say this as a person who is educated, y'all. I understand that being formally educated, being educated from an institution, learning or getting your education and receiving something in exchange for that education does not mean that a person has the ability to think critically. It does not mean that a person has the ability to operate in a space outside of that profession and be beneficial in that space. So you could be a great doctor, a great lawyer, a great social worker, a great teacher, a great educator, whatever it is, you name it, because you learned all the skills that you needed to do that job well and to be in that profession and to do well. But you may not be able to think about things very intuitively outside of your career. And the problem is we do get a lot of pride and ego in that space where we feel like, oh, because I went and got this degree and because I did this, I'm so smart. You know, sometimes you can get a little ahead of yourself and think that you know everything. You're not willing to learn. You're not really willing to indulge in other ideas that are not the ideas that have already been given to you or that you've already explored. And so I make that statement before I say anything because I really want to clarify what I mean by intellect. And I can give some examples. Sometimes you can have a conversation about something. So let's say medicine. There were some things that turned me off about medicine when I was beginning my study of medicine. And based on that, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. Based on that and a series of other circumstances, I decided that it just wasn't for me. I decided that the field itself was less about healing people and more about creating customers for life. And I say that because if you take a step back and you look at medicine, first of all, the study of medicine itself tells you we're not studying healing. We're not studying how to be better. We're studying medicine. We're studying the thing that we can take, put inside of our bodies. Basically, you're taking pathology, what goes wrong in the body and how to fix it, but you're using medicine to go about that process. And so when you look at many people who have doctors, especially when you get to be older, a lot of the conditions that they have go uncured and they just have it forever for the rest of their life. They take pills for it to manage the symptoms. And so what I had to collectively come to understand was the fact that these people are not being healed and there has to be a reason for that. Now, this is not the fault of the doctors because the doctors don't make the system. The doctors go to school to learn the system and then they go out and implement the system so that they can make a living. So this is not bashing anyone who is a part of the system. Often the problem is not with the people who actually operate within the system. The problem comes from beyond them and up above. And a lot of times we don't pay attention to those things. Now, I will say, I won't even elaborate on that point. Well, I will a little. So, for instance, if your aunt has high blood pressure, chances are the medication that she's taking, not chances are, the medication that she is taking is not going to make her high blood pressure go away. It's just going to manage it. What would make it go away is if she got some advice and actually took that advice on lifestyle changes, right? Eating better, practicing more or better dietary habits, practicing more exercising, being more active in her life, right? Staying away from stress. Those things would actually eliminate the need for her to continue to see the doctor for her high blood pressure, which would make sense why it's not as far reaching of a thing. And it would also make sense why those things are not taught in depth in medical school. It would also make sense why most doctors that you go to see are not healthy themselves, right? And so I don't want to say most, while some doctors that you go and see are not themselves healthy. And so even thinking about like endo and gastroenterology clinics, and I've worked in all of these spaces, and I was very observant. And one thing that I came away realizing was that really the doctors that are doing the healing work or the life-saving work are the ones who are in like trauma and some type of surgery. But most of the specialties are not really by design. Again, no fault of the doctor. They're not by design to heal patients. They just, in a way, create customers for life. And that I bring this up again to explain the point that I want to make, and why I'm making the point that intellectualism and the ability to think is not necessarily tied to a formal education, because there will actually be people in the field who will know that to be true. Even if they don't know it to be true, they will hear it, understand that there is some truth to the aspect of that, but they will still deny it because they think that admitting that that is true somehow makes them a bad person. And it doesn't. I don't think that it makes you a bad person as a doctor to come to that understanding, even though I say it wasn't for me, right? But I think that it makes you a person who is not full of ego and pride to take a step back and to admit that, and then to say, okay, well, what can be done about it, if anything can be done about it, or to point out some of the other high points. Because as I said, that's not, that statement that I just made, or that whole spiel, is not to say that we don't need doctors. I'm just exploring further into this point before I go a little bit deeper. And so the reason that I say that the new survival of the fittest is going to be intellect and the ability to think is because so many of us, and I realize now the power of the enemy and how we just give it to him so freely, and how everything that has happened over the past like couple of decades all ties together. We think that advancement is liberating and it gives us all of these freedoms, but really some of the advancement that we experience, especially when it comes to technology, ends up being something that keeps us in chains. It ends up being something that we will probably regret later. So we went from having to, for instance, when you wanted information, what did you have to do? You had to go look in an encyclopedia. And if you didn't have an encyclopedia in your home, you had to go to the library. And some of the libraries had systems on computers where you had to look things up, but you had to be very specific, and you actually had to spend time looking things up. Fast forward to now, and I remember the very first time I was on the computer, it wasn't even Google. Like, our gifted teacher had us using like Ask Jeeves, and she was showing us how to use Ask Jeeves to find stuff online. And I had to be in elementary school at the time. But even now, we've gone from, okay, an encyclopedia, looking things up on the library system, and even that may have been kind of limited to whatever resources they had available on those online systems. And then using something like Ask Jeeves. Even when we think about like the old Microsoft Word, I don't even know if it was Microsoft Word. It was Word. It was something. There was like this little paperclip guy who could help you to do autocorrect. And that was probably our first evidence of like some type of grammar help, or like Grammarly, or like very, very basic Chat GPT when it comes to writing, because he would check your writing and help you to do like spelling corrections, sometimes grammar corrections. Maybe you had run-on sentences, commas, whatever. And so we went from that to now having the internet, where when you plagiarized before, you were just copying and pasting something entirely, maybe changing a few words. But now you can write a whole essay using ChatGPT, and nobody would ever know if you changed some things around and just went and proofread it, right? And so the reason that I'm bringing this point is because the things that we are getting as benefits in technology are also things that are hindering us. So the art of writing is going to be something that slowly dies off, or there's going to be less appreciation. Well, maybe not less appreciation for it, because what will probably happen as people start to rely more and more on AI, people will value more authentic writing more. But we can probably assume that it will become something that's more obsolete and people won't spend their time doing it because you can just use AI to do it. And so as we lean into this and we look at things like, we went from having YouTube videos, right, where people could, and YouTube, OG YouTube was it was a time. People would people would post all kind of things on there, but it was a lot of personality, it was a lot of originality. We were intrigued by it, right? We were more likely to watch longer YouTube videos back then. We were more likely to watch longer anything back then. We were more likely to sit through a movie without being disturbed back then, because we weren't accustomed to having phones and having all these interruptions. So when you were watching a movie, you were actually watching a movie. There was no other side distraction that you had. And even when we started to get phones, they weren't very interesting. You could only call and text on them, and you might be able to play Snake if you had a Nokia, right? It wasn't too much that you could do on the phone that your phone would be so entertaining that it would take you away from life. And so as we advance with technology, we go from, like I said, the ability to sit and do things for longer periods of time. And now with things like TikTok and even Instagram, like altering the way that it does the algorithm and all of these new things that are being introduced to us, we are, even Twitter and tweets to a certain extent, we go from writing our thoughts in very long, thoughtful forms to just posting like sentences at a time without further elaboration. And then people who are used to watching longer videos or used to making longer videos, they kind of suffer in this space because nobody's really watching that, right? So even if your video is a great video, the content, the quality, it's a great video, is probably not going to be watched if it's too long, because now we have things like TikTok where people are just constantly scrolling. And so because of all these things combined with the new technology, it's really clear to see that the enemy wants to keep you distracted. He wants to keep you in this loop of wasting your time. And where the intellect part falls in is you have to be aware of that, and then you have to be a problem solver of that thing. Now, the problem is most people are aware of it, but they want to be the victim instead of like pulling themselves out of it. Or they want to treat God like he's this being that's just going to do everything for them, and they don't want to work out of their own salvation, which is a scary thing. There's a lot of people that just think, you know, you go and you get saved and that's it, and God did it. Jesus did it all at the cross. And again, it's one of those things where you have to question what survival of the fittest is going to look like going forward. People who get all of their information from little short clips, people who read the headlines of articles and they conclude that they know what's already being said. So, and I know that people are doing this because I read my comments every now and then, and I see some of these things. I had a comment on a video today. Somebody, I'm not even kidding, they wrote like an essay's worth of a response, and at the end of their response they said, I haven't watched the video yet, but I just wanted to get that off my chest. So they basically wrote a full-blown response to a video only based on the title and the description or what they thought the video was going to be about, but they did not watch the video, and they think that it's appropriate to have that level of a response to something that you haven't even heard yet, right? And so imagine the number of people walking around being triggered and not being able to regulate their triggers. Imagine the number of people walking around with the inability to sit still long enough to think, actively think. And where this becomes harmful is that everyone starts to rely on external sources to get information. Like that's something that we've always done, right? When you don't know something, you have to look for the information. But what I mean is, let's say, I don't know, 20 years ago, you were making a recipe or something and you saw something on TV on like the Food Network, and you were allergic to something that they put in that recipe. There was no ability to chat and text into the show live while that person is cooking and say, hey, what can I sub for chicken if my kids are allergic? Hey, is there something that I can use instead of the avocados? I don't really like those. You would have to figure it out. Like, you would literally have to figure it out. You have to call people in your life who knew, or you would just have to experiment on your own. You would think. And it wasn't even something that would be a very nuanced thing, a very annoying thing, a very annoying thing for us, because we didn't have any other option, right? So the problem now is what is now becoming our content. It is the same style of content that we've always seen. We've seen cooking shows. So there's creators who do like cooking shows, but they're on TikTok. The only difference is now they can go live and they can have an audience commenting live while they're live. You can post a video and your audience can post comments to that video. And it's great because sometimes it does start conversations, but it is quite disturbing to see the number of people who have removed their ability to think and problem solve on their own. It's like everyone wants another person to be their done for you project and give them the solutions to all of their problems. I made a video about fasting and praying, and I was surprised by how many people said, well, how do I fast that long? Or like, how do I fast? How do I go about talking to God about this thing? Or how do I do this? And again, if this was something that you had seen on TV, if somebody was talking to you on some news network or on some TV show and they said the same thing that I said in the video, do you yell at the screen? Like 20 years ago, I don't know, 30 years ago, would you be talking to the screen like, oh, how do I do that? Or would you have to get up and figure it out if it was something that you really wanted to do? And so the new devices that we have as far as technology make it very easy for us to not have to think. They make it very easy for us to have to outsource our thinking. And if you get very comfortable in doing that, you know the term, if you don't use it, you lose it. This is something I heard when I was studying another language. And my teacher would always tell me, she was like, after you go abroad, when you come back, you need to find a speaking partner if you really want to keep up with the language, because if you don't use it, you lose it. And it doesn't just apply to that. It applies to a lot of other things, right? If you have a skill that you don't sharpen and work on, that skill will not improve. And so if we continue to outsource our thinking, we will lose the ability to think. If we continue to always, if I post a video about how I styled my baby's hair, or if I post a video about how I saved $10,000, and you really think that you're going to do exactly what I did, that's the problem too. People think that if I, a person, post my personal experience, that they have to go and replicate exactly what I did, or that they need all the details. We're just very lazy. I have videos, I read a lot. If you follow me on any of my other platforms aside from the podcast, which I'm sure you do because most people find the podcast from my other platforms, you know that I read a lot. And if I read a book that I feel like, wow, I want other people to read this book is really good, I will read little snippets of the book. And there are some times where I clip the book because I can be very chatty when I'm passionate about something, which is funny because I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert. But when I am passionate about something, I can talk for a long time about the thing. I can elaborate on a lot of points. I can really beat the horse dead, if you will. And so sometimes I will have a video for these books and I try to make them like 10 minutes, no more than 10 minutes when I'm reading little segments, unless it's a full book review, which I post on YouTube. And so sometimes I will clip the videos. Now, when I do the video, I don't pressure myself to say the title in the video because I know I'm always going to put it on the screen, in the description, or on the title somewhere. It's going to be somewhere where you can find it. But this is how cooked we are. I will post it, and I'm not being funny. I just want people to take more responsibility for things, because I'm not going to tell, I don't have a problem with when people say, hey, what's the name of the book? I don't care. I'll type out the comment if I feel like it. I don't take any offense when they do it, but it's an observation. I'm a person and I'm allowed to make observations, right? I will post a video of me reading a book, and I promise you, I do not post these clips without putting somewhere Like I said, caption, description on the screen, somewhere in the video. I might even say it in the video at some point, beginning, end, middle, if you stick around long enough. I always put it there. And I do that because I know that people sometimes want to know. If you're intrigued by this thing that I read, the natural thing is going to be, wow, what's this book? The problem is people don't take the time to look. They don't look at the caption. They don't read the description. They don't take it upon themselves. And I know that there were quite a few people, a handful of people, that I had to say, and because they responded very nastily, but I had to say to them, you should really take the time to look for things. You should take the time to actually seek out the information. Most people, if they just say, what's the name of the book, I'll just say it. But if you say, if you're going to read this book, you should provide the information. If you are going to do this, it's really annoying when creators don't cite the source. But it's like you're saying all of that, but you didn't even take the time as a responsible consumer to see if the information was there before you accuse me of not giving the information. And again, I think sometimes, you can be like, oh, well, maybe it's just people don't know this, or maybe it's just people don't know. I don't believe that. I think people are lazy, and I think people are entitled, and I think that this is why we struggle sometimes. I think this is why we can't have quality conversations. And as I mentioned, I think that this is why the next survival of the fittest will be an intellectual thing. It will come down to, and this may sound very Bible thumping too, but it will come down to people who have the ability to sit with God's word, people who have the ability to be in communion with God, people who have the ability to even take their flesh under submission and fast and pray. And if you're fasting and praying for a solution, understanding that it might not happen the first time, you might have to fast and pray for a couple weeks. You might have to do it once a month for like 3-4 months. It might take a couple of years, but do you have the ability to withstand that? Right? And I think it's important to make that connection too, because sometimes we think that to be an intellectual, you can't be a person who believes in Yahuwah, which I find that to be very interesting, because there's a lot of intellect that's required in order to really get down to the truth, especially in the world that we live in, where the ways that things are presented to us is lie after lie after lie after lie. So to even seek out what the truth is, you do have to have some level of intellect. And again, I'm not referring to your ability to go and graduate from somewhere. I'm talking about your ability to be disciplined in a thing, seeking after knowledge and knowing how to find the information that you're seeking after. In other words, just being resourceful. That's what I think intellect boils down to. Being resourceful in any regard, taking information and making it applicable to you, right? Like I mentioned, I might say, oh, I did this, and this is how I went about this process to do X, Y, and Z. And somebody saying, oh, okay, what about if it's this? Like, that's not my problem. I just told you my experience. Take my experience and go take your information and cross-reference and figure it out. Everything is not the next person's problem. And we've lost the ability to just think. We've lost the ability to be inspired by something and then go and create something based on it. We've lost the ability to hear general information and learn how to make it applicable to our own lives instead of expecting the person who provided the general information to make it applicable. Another example, and I talk a lot about husbands and wives. That's kind of like the primary thing that I talk about. And I have wifey school that's ongoing. So I do talk a lot about husbands and wives, because even if people can't enroll, there's just certain information that I've learned, that I've experienced in my own marriage, that I've seen other people do in relationships, and I just know it could benefit people. So I talk about those things. And I remember talking one time about, like, if your husband is a non-believer, don't leave your non-believing husband. This is what the word says. And nowhere in that video that I say that this man was abusing you or doing anything grossly immoral, because this is another thing that people don't think about. If I am saying don't leave your non-believing husband, a non-believing husband, let's not be crazy, let's not be dense. That does not necessarily mean that this is a terrible man who is doing you wrong. It just means that he has not placed his faith in Jesus Christ. It means that he is a non-believer, right? we all know decent people who don't necessarily believe in God. People who don't believe in God are not necessarily inherently evil or trying to do wrong. Most people in general are trying to do the right thing in life. However, when you are a believer as a woman who is married to a man who is not a believer, that can bring on other struggles because you see things spiritually that your husband doesn't see. You are submitted to a God that your husband doesn't necessarily believe in or that he's not necessarily committed to. So when I say don't leave your unbelieving husband, I'm not saying all unbelieving men are abusive, cheaters, liars, thieves. Like, no. And so under that post, I had someone basically essay form. It's always the essay form videos, responses. And she basically said, well, what do you tell a woman who is being abused in this situation? Like, you're saying pray and you're saying do this, but what happens in this instance? And here's the thing. I'm not at all invalidating that type of question. What I am trying to bring to the forefront is, why do you think that that question is appropriate under this particular video, right? Or if you do think that it's appropriate, why not ask it in a better way? And this is the problem that I have. I think that we've also, because we can't think clearly, we don't know how to not be off-putting to people. And a number of times that people have said things online, and I truly try not to take offense. Like, I just don't let things bother me. But I do call foolishness out when I see it, because I feel like, don't come over here harassing me and playing devil's advocate, right? And so we went back and forth for a while, and I just explained to her. I said, well, I answered the question, and I said, well, at what point do we as individuals take our faith in our own hands and we go to God in prayer? Because if your husband cheats on you, personally, I think cheating is abuse. If your husband cheats on you, but I don't believe that if you're cheated on, you should necessarily leave. Okay, let me also add that, because goodness. But I feel like cheating is a form of abuse, as are other things that we don't necessarily look at as abuse because it's not physically harming a person. But let's say your husband cheats on you and you decide, I'm going to stay. Okay, fine. He cheats on you, you're going to stay. You forgive him, you go to therapy, you go to God and pray, you do whatever needs to be done for you to rebuild that trust in that relationship, or he does whatever he needs to do to help to rebuild the trust that he broke in that relationship. And you notice that he's still doing it, so he's a habitual cheater. That is not the same as, and I know a lot of people will say, yes, it is, but I don't believe that is the same thing as a man who cheated, you work through it, and he does not continue to go on to cheat. Those are two different things. A man who is struggling financially and he's draining your finances right now because he doesn't have a job and he's between jobs, and then he gets his job and now he's back on his feet and the finances are coming together, is not the same as a man who has a gambling problem and is always gambling away all your money. Right? Like, we have to stop this. We have to stop, and we have to stop not leaving room for nuance in conversations. And not only not leaving room for nuance in conversations, but understanding that some things you have to go and figure out on your own, and you can't just be asking people about if they're not talking about that thing. And so what I do believe, when I read the comments, the problem that I really had was it just didn't come off as a sincere question. It just came off as, I'm triggered and I want to invalidate everything that you're saying. And I'm sorry, but you can tell when people are doing that, because a general question or a genuine question sounds like a genuine question this person is asking specifically. And again, I don't necessarily get annoyed when people do that. It just always points me back to, why are we as a society unable to take general information and figure out how to apply it to our lives? Why are we not able to hear someone say, we really need to get back to fasting and prayer, and then take it upon ourselves? I saw a video, very beautiful video, very beautiful testimony. Her name's Abby. She's a stay-at-home mom too on TikTok, but she shared the story of how God delivered her baby from the spirit of autism. And all throughout the story, or all throughout her testimony, it's just so moving, and there's so many personalized things that she said. And I went to the comments, and again, I know that these are people who are hungry and desperate for answers, but I just think that we have lost the ability to do these things on our own. People are asking her, where should I go for deliverance? What what kind of fast should I do? And again, this is where the intellect part comes in, because as she's describing this and as she's saying what's happening, you can tell she did not necessarily decide, I'm going to fast and do this. These were things she was praying and praying and praying, and God was speaking to her and her husband on how to regulate the fast and what to do. Even at one point in her testimony, she's talking about how she was praying, and they were praying with some friends who had come into agreement with them. Some really good friends of theirs who had come into agreement with them, and they were on the line praying. And in the middle of praying, her husband got up, and she didn't know where he went, but she didn't interrupt him. But he went to go pray over her daughter. That's not hey, what prayer did he say? Because she later described in the testimony that her husband got up because Holy Spirit moved him to get up and go pray over our daughter. So there is no, that's not a process where you can say, step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. The testimony is meant to be inspiration. And a lot of times, because we are unable to think and comprehend, we cannot take people's general information and use it to our advantage, because we want people to answer our personalized questions. When testimonies, sharing, people giving their experiences, people offering advice, it's really meant to help you to be inspired to come to a solution more than it is to try to help you to be super customizable in your result. And our constant need and ability to lean on other people for support in things where sometimes we need to be working that out with God on our own. It's scary. It is scary. It is scary how many people are unable to do certain things. I remember I was talking to someone, and this is not like homeschool versus, no, it's not. I believe that there are great public schools as well. I chose to homeschool for our own reasons, and we have our own things, and eventually our kids will be going back to school. But this is just something I noticed. I was wondering, and I was having a conversation with someone about the use of writing, and if it is even worth the effort and the energy to go through all of these writing prompts and to go through the process of what it is that we're teaching our children. Because I'm like, is this going to be something, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is it going to be obsolete? Like, I'm teaching my children all these parts of speech and like how to write an expository paragraph and what it means to write a persuasive essay, and they're learning all of these things. But is it possible that we're going to come to a space where people are no longer going to be writing it themselves, and they're just going to be relying on AI? Again, just food for thought. But the idea that we are unable collectively to just think, to find solutions to things, and to not be so quick to rely on other people for answers, so quick to look to people for answers, so quick to be so invested in what other people are doing. I don't know. It's just, it's something that I don't have the solution to. I know that even this podcast episode, the people who listen to it aren't necessarily the people who need to hear it. But I'm just not sure what to do about that. But that's my thought process. I do know that those who are unwilling to learn and adapt, those who are unwilling to be responsible for themselves, those who continually play the victim in every situation, those who are always looking for other people, especially the government, to solve their problems, are going to be the people who suffer the most in the times ahead. And so if you feel that that is you, my advice to you would be to get serious about your relationship with Yah, for one, and get very comfortable with seeking answers on your own and not always relying on external sources to give the answers to you. Get very comfortable with doing true research on topics. Don't just look up something on Google and go with the first sentence that you read. Actually dig through some of those things. If there's an abstract study, if there's research to support the thing, if there's articles, take the time to read those articles and be more responsible for the information that you seek out. Be more responsible for the things that you consume. Be more responsible for what it is that you believe. Don't just take things at face value, or take the first thing that's presented to you. And don't just take other people's word for things. Actually do the research on your own. This was a very long TED Talk today, wasn't it? Thanks for listening, though. I'll see you in the next episode.